On this edition of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast, part 2 of our 3-part series entitled The Pioneers. Welcome to episode 42 of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. Time to take another trip down memory lane as we look back at the Pioneer League's days in Alberta. Last time around, we reminisced about the Lethbridge Expos, the first team to arrive in 1975. That season hadn't even started yet when league officials started sniffing around at possible expansion locations. The one thing getting in the way was that with a 14 league, they wanted it to grow in even numbers, so they needed to find 2 suitable locations. The 3 spots identified early on were Butte, Montana, Calgary, and Medicine Hat. All 3 seemed to be at different stages of readiness when the league came through, so adding to the league in 1976 didn't happen. But ahead of the 77 campaign, 2 cities stood out above the rest, and they were the 2 Alberta contingents. In this episode of the podcast, we'll focus in on Medicine Hat. It was a little touch and go, to be honest, after it was announced the Oakland A's would be moving their affiliate from Boise, Idaho to southeastern Alberta. The city was embroiled in what was described as a fiasco surrounding renovations at Athletic Park, including going massively over budget. Then the A's put in a deadline to get things done a few weeks before the season started, and Mother Nature didn't help. Massive rainfalls forced crews to install sod instead of planting grass seed, and the infield was all dirt. Believe it or not, it actually stayed that way for a few seasons. But on June 25th, 1977, the Medicine Hat A's made their professional debut, knocking off the Billings Mustangs 3-1. We wrote about that game in detail a couple of years ago, and you can go to albertadugoutstories.com for more on the one season of A's baseball in Medicine Hat. For a guest this week, we turn to a man who needs no introduction. Bob Ridley is the Hall of Fame voice of the Western Hockey League's Medicine Hat Tigers. He's broadcast all but one game for the Tabbies since their inception in 1970. What many people may not know is that he was the play-by-play voice for about 8 seasons with the A's, then later the Blue Jays. Not only that, just like he did with the Tigers, he also drove the team bus as well. I chatted with Rids about his memories of the Pioneer League, some of the good times, and also some of the learning curves he encountered. Everybody talks about you and your hockey, but a lot of people don't realize that back in the mid-'70s, early '80s, you were also a pretty big voice on the baseball scene. Talk us through your involvement with first the Medicine Hat A's in 1977, and then after that, the Medicine Hat Blue Jays.
Yeah, it was a real pleasant time for me. Hockey's always been, of course, the number one thing that I've been involved in, but broadcasting baseball was another thing that kind of a change of pace, you might say, Joe, and kept me busy throughout the summer months. It became too much, though. It was like you got to remember the Pioneer Baseball League back at that time. It was a 72-game schedule, and you played those 72 games in 2 months. So you only had one day off, and that was for the All-Star break. So you jump right into baseball, right into hockey, and then right from hockey back into baseball again. And it just became a little bit too much, so I took hockey instead, and that gave me the summers off. But I have to admit that I just loved broadcasting Baby J baseball here in Medicine Hat. It gave us a real good thought and a real good feel as to what Major League Baseball is all about. Pat Gillick, he was the general manager of the big club at the time. He'd come passing through here periodically to check out his prospects and so on. And it really made us feel part of what the Blue Jays were all about. So it was a great time, and I'll always remember my time with the Medicine Hat Blue Jays.
Take us back to those initial days. I mean, the Pioneer League was still in its infancy, at least here in this province, when it comes to Lethbridge had a team at the time. Medicine Hat and Calgary were getting involved. I mean, there had to have been a lot of road trips, and I know you were involved as you were the bus driver as well.
Yeah, I drove the bus as well for them, and there was a lot of long nights, Joe. I'll tell you one thing, when you're going to Idaho Falls and down to Billings and so on, and it was a lot of long nights, but some great baseball that we saw. Back in the earlier days when the Blue Jays were involved, the Medicine Hat Blue Jays, we had Toronto drafting a lot of players out of the South America, and consequently they came straight from South America here to Medicine Hat, and then the coaches here would have to take over and only try to teach them the Canadian game or the North American game, but also English. And most of them had no idea what English was all about. That was very, very tough. So later, they still drafted a lot of players coming out of the Dominican Republic and Venezuela and so on, but they would bring them to kind of a halfway place, and they play some baseball in Florida before they were shipped up to Medicine Hat, taught them a little bit of English, taught them a little bit of what our lifestyle was all about, and it made it a lot easier for the Blue Jays at that time. So it was an interesting time, and it was kind of a growing time for the Blue Jay organization as well.
That had to have been real interesting to watch as someone who is completely cold to the idea of being anywhere outside of home. I know hearing Lloyd Moseby even tell his story of coming from the Oakland area all the way up to Medicine Hat.
Oh, my goodness. Bill Ewell flew a helicopter into Calgary to pick me up, and I'm like, you got to remember, I'm coming from Oakland, California. I've never been out of there, even though I'm from Portland, Arkansas. I had never been out of Oakland ever. And so to get have somebody send a helicopter for me and Calgary it was unbelievable. But my greatest memory, I'm staying at the Assiniboia Inn, which was a place in Medicine Hat that is go down in history. Anyway, I look out my window, I hear some noise. There was people with cows and horses in a parade. What the hell? And that was a culture shock, without a doubt. John McLaren, which was he was my manager and today is one of my greatest friends in the world, had to settle me down. I didn't know where I was. I didn't understand what the heck. So that was one of my fun moments, and John still kidded me about that because that was it was shocking to look out my window and see cows and horses going down the middle of the street.
And it had to have been interesting from your standpoint is to watch some of these young men get thrown into it feet first.
Well, something, Joe, they were actually scared. As soon as they got off the bus here in Medicine Hat, you could see their eyes. And what is this? Where are we? Like in South America, they're surrounded by jungle and everything else. And even in some places in the States, like you said, it's a different type of a climate. And then you're tossed into Medicine Hat. And you know what some of our summers can be. They can be very, very hot or sometimes very, very cold. And it was an awful lifestyle change for these young guys. And like a lot of these guys are drafted, they're only 17, 18, 19 years old. So they had no idea what to expect. And actually, Medicine Hat did a real good job. We had some good people that would take them under the wing as billets and so on and teach them life skills of what life in Medicine Hat was all about, and it actually worked out pretty well. But boy, those first couple of 3 years, it was really tough on those kids for sure.
Probably really similar to the junior hockey circuit that way in terms of really giving kids that first dose of adulthood.
Absolutely. There's a lot of similarities there. And, back then, of course, it was like nowadays, these kids they've got all their telephones and everything else and their iPhones, and they've got a good feel as to what it's all about. But back then, there was no such thing, so it was a big learning curve for them, let's put it that way.
I was going to ask about those road trips. I mean, when you're not sitting there with a phone in hand, walk us through some of those long trips down to Idaho Falls and those other places, and what were some of the kids usually doing while you were sitting behind the wheel? Well,
basically, even then we had VCRs on the bus and so on, so they'd watch a lot of movies. But something, Joe, just like hockey players, they sleep a lot. When you're playing 72 games in 73 days, it's a tiring thing. They're at the ballpark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for batting practice. Then they play the game. Then they go back to wherever, the hotel or maybe to the billets or whatever, and then they're right back at the ballpark again. And there's not a lot of downtime. So these guys, much like the hockey players nowadays, they sleep a lot. They slept a lot on the bus, and there was never any problem that way.
I'm curious, when you look back on your time, not just with the team, but obviously being front and center in the Medicine Hat sports scene, you got to watch a little bit of ball as well and cover it. Any names that you look back on and go, man, they were good ball players here, or some who maybe you were kind of drawn to because they had the great personalities?
Well, it was a combination of both. You became friends with a lot of them, and a lot of the Blue Jay management that would come through here, their pitching coaches and everything else, just to, check out the kids. But some of the players, you mentioned one, and Lloyd Moseby, he was just one of the funniest guys. He had his own cards made up, and he'd be walking around Medicine Hat, going into the hotels and everything else, handing out cards to come and watch the ball game, watch him play, and all that kind of stuff. He was a very unique personality and just a wonderful guy to be around, and always had a smile on his face. He made everybody else smile as well. And it was just a marvelous thing to watch him develop as a ball player. And you mentioned also Jimmy Key. He was an outstanding pitcher, went on and did some great things. Pat Borders, and the list goes on and on. So, in those years that we had the Blue Jays here, made a lot of good friends, watched a lot of good baseball too, and especially these kids just coming out of high school basically and developing. And boy, they really learned a lot, learned very quickly in the short 2 months that they were here.
One of the unique things about Medicine Hat is that with whether it's Calgary, Lethbridge, even Edmonton, when they had minor league affiliates, they seem to bounce between different organizations. Medicine Hat had, outside of the 1 year with Oakland in 1977, they were able to stick with the Toronto Blue Jays the whole time. What made that relationship work, and what made that city work in your eyes?
That's a good question, Joe. I never really thought of it, but I know there was the people in Toronto were very, very pleased with the fact that Medicine Hat had a real strong connection with them. And probably the biggest connection was the owner, Bill Ewell. Bill was the guy that made it all happen. Both him and Larry Plant brought that particular Pioneer Baseball League franchise to Medicine Hat, first the A's and then the Blue Jays, and they never left. It was just a very workable relationship, and us being in Canada, Toronto being in Canada, I think it was a real good fit. And I certainly have to pat Bill Ewell on the back for, his devotion to good baseball here in Medicine Hat. And without his promotion and him with his thoughts about Canadian baseball, this probably wouldn't have happened. So once again, Bill Ewell is the guy that deserves a lot of credit.
You mentioned the billets. You've mentioned the fans as well. Walk us through, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, there, a typical home game at Athletic Park. And what was the atmosphere like then?
It depended upon how well the team was doing at the time, Joe. But for the most part, always positive. For the most part, unless the weather was terrible, we had decent crowds and so on. And probably better crowds than most of the teams down there in the States. So we were very, very proud of, just how we handled pro baseball. I mean, it was rookie league baseball, but still pro. These kids are getting paid and everything else. So, but a typical day, well, they came to the ballpark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for batting practice, and the game would start about 7:05 at night, and we'd go through the process of the ball game, and for the most part, the fans were enthusiastic, and they knew that they had to get out and support this team, or else they'd lose it. And for the most part, for those number of years that the Blue Jays were here, there was good support.
Any memories that stick out in your mind, favorites, or ones that make you still giggle to this day?
Well, it's the way I really felt sorry for the Latin Americans coming out of the States in those earlier years. I know, believe it or not, Joe, they weren't taught a whole lot. And, with some of the stuff that they ate and so on, it just kind of made you wonder, like a lot of the food that they bought at, say, Safeway or whatever else, that you and I just automatically cook. Sometimes poor kids didn't know any different, and they just ate it raw. You know what I mean? And it was a little bit scary, but maybe that's what they did down there at that time. But I'll tell you one thing, nobody got sick. And they seemed to thrive on it. So maybe we're doing everything wrong. I'm not sure.
Very true. Final question for you. Looking back on your time and Medicine Hat's time with the Blue Jays, what is one thing that you will always remember? One thing that will always stick with you?
Well, I think it was just the idea that you're involved with big league baseball, and they looked at the Medicine Hat Blue Jays as an integral part of what their organization was all about, because it was rookie league ball. It was where these kids were starting, and some of those kids, moved on and became outstanding players in Major League Baseball. And I think it was that connection with big league baseball that made the Medicine Hat Blue Jays very, very special in my mind, Joe.
They were definitely special for a lot of people I know in that city, whether you're a billet, whether you're a fan, whether you're just someone passing through. I think there's a lot of great memories of the Medicine Hat Blue Jays. And Bob, you were a part of those memories, I think, for a lot of people as they were listening to the radio, and certainly still are with what you do with the Tigers. Always a pleasure to chat with you, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us in the podcast.
Joe, thank you so much for letting me be a part of what you're all about, and I'm glad to see that you're doing so very well.
As Rids alluded to, the community still remembers players like Lloyd Moseby, Jimmy Key, Pat Borders, Chris Carpenter, Orlando Hudson, and Eric Kratz, among many others who came through. The club stuck around until 2002, when a combination of factors led to the team moving, including a new ownership group for the Toronto Blue Jays and a relatively new ownership group in Medicine Hat who wanted to move the team to Helena, Montana. And of course, that ended up happening. It was an unceremonious way for a highly regarded team to depart after 25 seasons. But the next year, the Western Major Baseball League's Medicine Hat Mavericks were born and ended up winning the league title that season. Whether it's the new WCBL, American Legion, Little League, or any other level, baseball is still thriving in the southeast corner of the province. We want to thank Bob Ridley for coming on the podcast this week and sharing his memories of the Baby Jays. We also want to thank you for downloading and listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Podbean. If you want to listen in on another app, just drop us a line, as we're more than happy to investigate other options to make your listening experience the absolute best. We'll see you next time here on Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast.